Welcome to Talent Horizon, the podcast that brings you the latest on AI and its impact on the staffing and recruitment industry. I'm Lee, your industry expert.
And I'm Helge, your go-to AI guru. And we're thrilled to have with us today a revered veteran in the IT industry, Peter Sundergaard. Did I pronounce that correctly, Peter?
You did. Thank you.
Welcome. It's great to have you with us.
It's a great pleasure as well. I spent a lifetime at a company called Gartner. And when I say a lifetime, it almost is a lifetime because it was 30 years, in which I, the last 15, was responsible for Gartner's global research organization. And then the last 5, I have been working in my own company as an advisor to senior executive teams in large companies. And apart from that, just ensure that I also enjoy other parts of life than work.
First and foremost, in your view, how has AI reshaped the recruitment industry?
Any conversation these days around AI, you kind of have to put it into a number of phases. And we're in this phase of exuberance concerning AI that started at the beginning of this year, which is truly unfair to all the people that worked really hard on AI in 2022 and beforehand, because a lot of things happened, but suddenly the world seems to have discovered that AI is something important. If I look at it, and from my perspective, it's more a question of looking at things in aggregate than necessarily in detail and technical detail. I think the first thing that AI has really reinforced with the recruitment industry is this move from a focus around jobs to skills. Essentially focusing on the skill set of individuals, and that defines what they are. And it's a question of what is your maturity within the skills area. And I think that is clearly reshaping the industry. For the recruitment industry, the clients of the recruiters, whether it's internal recruiters or external recruiting organizations, they are now tasked with managing skills in a way where you balance both skills that are human skills and then skills that are AI skills. So this need to essentially be a recruiter of skills means that the recruiting industry becomes much more technical in its nature, because it needs to understand which skills are actually embodied inside software, inside algorithms and ability to detect things. Recruiters are both recruiters of humans and digital humans. And that, of course, will change things over the next not 2 or 3 years, but probably 5 or 10 years in terms of what defines the recruitment industry. And of course, simple tasks and a vast majority of tasks that are done by recruiters and the recruitment industry will be done by AI. So you could say what you offer changes and how you do it also changes substantially, because tasks don't need to be performed by humans. So as with every other industry and as with every other part of our life, the next 5, 10 to 15 years sort of will catapult ourselves into a substantial changed environment compared to where we are today.
And kind of building on that, Peter, I was just really eager to understand your point there, because what is the role of the recruiter in this future that you talk about? Because for a recruiter listening, it might sound scary. The AI will do a lot of the job that they are doing today. Like what will be the role of the recruiter in the future?
I think the role of the recruiter is to understand the particular human skills of individuals that are being recruited. And I think there will be much more a focus on understanding the emotional, the human part of what defines us as people, and then also understand the technical aspects that define, shall we call them digital humans, or the personal digital assistants of the future, because you'll be hiring 2 environments that contain both. The role becomes much more focused on understanding humans versus machine. It obviously also becomes similar to what we've seen in marketing, right? Marketing has gone from being a skill set that was people smoking cigars in a bar and deciding on a slogan for something, into a world where 50% of the marketing budget is a technology budget. And I think what we will see in recruiting and in HR activity overall is an increasing part of the budget will be a technical budget, which means that recruiting organizations will increasingly be technical related. It will be human skills with a back end that's all technology. So the role becomes more a question of being an interpreter, a guide, a personal assistant for the humans engaging in a world that's very complex. Because a lot of what is done in recruiting, all the data, the evaluation, the information gathering activities, those are all going to be automated. So it leaves the relationship with the humans, even though AI will also augment the customer activities that you do. So those in of themselves are not going to stay constant as they are today, but will also evolve.
Can you perhaps give us some concrete examples of how companies are leveraging AI in their HR processes and perhaps some of the benefits that they are seeing as a result?
I mean, there's obviously a lot, because I think going back to my point is that an increasing part of the HR budget becomes a technology budget, which means that an increasing part of the work done by HR organizations will incorporate technology to be broad, and obviously a critical pillar of that is AI. And you can basically go through all the activities that is done in an HR organization. So you say payroll and compensation. I think you're now seeing many large organizations do AI-based compensation planning, right? So you actually don't need huge spreadsheets and trying to figure out how you navigate that percentage of allocating the set amount of money that you were given for next year across the right employees. I think this aspect of continuous AI-supported performance evaluations is another thing that is happening right now. I've been postulating that at least 40% of performance evaluations by the end of this year is going to be written by ChatGPT and not the manager. Because why not? I mean, you put in information about, the person that, or the people that work for you, and now you get this wonderfully written prose that obviously you check, but then, at least you can do probably a better job than the average manager does, right? So that's, payroll, compensation. Recruiting we've talked about, and I think we see companies there are already using AI-based and AI skills-based recruiting platforms. We're starting to see large companies look at sort of more ecosystem-based skills so that you're sourcing in a different way, of which some of those skills are actually AI skills. And I've seen companies that have been working on sort of AI-assisted recruiter platforms at scale. So I think there I can go through learning and development, diversity and inclusion, which is where I think we're seeing some companies now finally look at articulating what is our AI ethics charter. How do we actually deal with the ethic-based aspects of AI as an element of diversity and inclusion in companies? Because we will have to consider how we incorporate digital humans into the plethora of different people that we have in organizations and wants to have in organizations. So I can continue, you can go through every function and you will find that AI and technology will be part of every function. And we are seeing companies today that are in the midst of looking at that. The head of HR should go to talk to marketing, the CMO, to understand what actually happens in terms of a transformation of a business function. And of course, recruiting organizations in the external world that supports HR needs to go to marketing agencies and talk to them to understand what happened the last 10 years in marketing, because that's happening right now in their industry.
This is very interesting, but I just imagined in the example you mentioned, this performance review that comes beautifully written. And then what I would have done, I would have taken that and asked ChatGPT to write an email beautifully written to ask for more salary. That's kind of, and then you're kind of left with like, who's really reading this? Like, it's just taking it to ChatGPT again and then feeding it back. And that kind of begs to question, like, do you need this? Because if I knew that it was written by ChatGPT, it wouldn't be as interesting to me as if it's genuinely written by a human. So because the human element, and talking to someone. You kind of lose that with that approach. So for the employees, what kind of impact do you think it will have on employees and the way they perceive this and interact with AI?
The major aspect here is we need to be grounded in the fact that this is actually supportive to what we do. In most instances, it's not the totality of what we do. I'm sure we will get into an arms race between employer and employee on who uses the technology the smartest way. But at the end, I kind of believe in this aspect that AI becomes personal decision assistance. Because what we do as a job is we make decisions, right? And I don't think we want AI to make the decision, just as we don't want AI to actually fully write and send the performance evaluation. But we can use AI to help articulate it, and then we can put our own spin to it. So that means AI becomes sort of a personal decision assistant. The correct usage is as a supporter, as a digital instance that sits beside you, as opposed to a digital instance that replaces you.
Kind of going back to this skill-based recruitment that you talked about, the future that you talked about, do you imagine that it will be almost like a marketplace where the employer and the employee will kind of interact directly? Or will recruiters still be kind of the middlemen trying to facilitate this in many instances?
There's a world the next 15 years in which there is always going to be a need for the human decision and human involvement in things. And I think even in areas where people are postulating that AI will replace the entire job, I'm skeptical, at least in a sort of a 10 to 15 year time horizon, because there's always things that involve a human that can't be programmatically defined. It's about that magic of what happens when humans talk and it sparks some innovation. That is still needed in a vast majority of jobs. I think we'll have a world in which when that is needed, there's still need for the middlemen to help facilitate the integration between the person and the organization that is seeking their skill set. Increasingly, though, it's not going to be like it has been. So one has to expect that certain things change. And if you go to some of the fundamentals, what changes speed, is accuracy in the recruiting process, because we can use technology for that. So I think there'll still be a need, just as there, at least for the last 10 years, has been in marketing for marketing agencies. There will still be a need for recruiters for HR, but the recruiters will have to change the way they work because HR is changing the way they work. And so the hard thing of predicting this is you have a lot of moving parts, and we can all postulate about the first order change of things, but it's the second order change of things that is the most interesting one and almost impossible to predict when you have several spheres interacting and all of them have second and third order changes as a result of technology, as a result of AI.
I can tell you, kind of working in Globus AI and where we're trying to really pick up on the skill set of candidates, it really leaves a lot to the data and how it's structured and how you capture it, which again goes back to the recruiter and how they do that and how they pick up all the information and put it into a system and kind of how you capture the data basically. And I think we're quite a way off until, you're able to do that in an efficient and good manner. You have a lot of steps yet to take to get there. What kind of skill sets the recruiters and HR managers need to kind of develop in the years to come or even now?
The skill set, apart from what I said earlier, which is around sort of the human understanding, there is an aspect of also understanding the need to both appreciate the stability required in organizations and around employees, as well as innovation and agility. So this aspect of a former colleague of mine in Gartner often called this that organizations, but it also applies to leaders and therefore HR and recruiters, need to be both samurais, So sort of classical Japanese, very structured and stable and rooted in tradition. And then ninjas, agile, ability to move fast, innovate. And when we talked about the first phase of digitalization about 15 years ago, it was that you kept these two worlds separate because you needed both. I think now we're in a world where managers need to be ambidextrous in some way in terms of how they operate. And I think that's important from a perspective of recruiting organizations and their customers, the HR organizations and the employee. And then I think obviously an understanding of data and what data does is now a critical aspect of working in HR. And up until now, if you look at large HR organizations, they've been focused on, building a data and analytics function or having a person that does that. And you do that for some time until you recognize that it actually has to be part of the fabric of the organization. So what you're doing in Globus AI needs to be pervasive across the entire industry because it defines how you operate. And so we're kind of balancing this aspect of a set of sort of softer skills that have to evolve, of which one of them is the human aspect, and then a set of very hard technical skills that you need to mix in with that. All of it new for most people involved in this ecosystem. I think we'll have a world where we need to understand the fundamental fabric of what makes an organization that you need to hire somebody into, right? I mean, in Gartner and every other organization has the same thing. There's a very strong knowledge of what it is you need and the people that you bring in, and that's not necessarily a skill set. It's how, from a Gartner perspective, how are they both good at being analytical, an ability to articulate things verbally? How are they good at then also articulating things in presentation mode? So how could they write? And how can they do things from a presentation mode perspective? And I think today you could say, do they have the sufficient skills when they come in, but you can't necessarily predict how it evolves. You can use technology to fast evaluate how they get there. The time span becomes shorter. The quality of what you do may in fact go up. And where we belong as humans becomes clearer in this evolution.
I was still spinning on this skills and how we'll pick that up in the future. I'm kind of imagining there's three ways of doing it. It's you can either self-input whatever skills you have and evaluate yourself, put it into a system. You can have a third party doing it for you. So a recruiter would maybe evaluate you during an interview, put it into an ATS system, or you do a certification or a training course and they would kind of add it to your resume. The third way is automatically picking up skills based on maybe your behavior or something that you do. Do you think we'll see more of that? Because I think the two first one is kind of how we traditionally do it today. There's biases, it's time consuming, but how in the future will we understand the skills of people and how they evolve over time?
Yeah, I think the third is the most interesting, and I think is the one that will evolve fastest over the next 5 years. It's a question of using technology. So, for example, the crowd can help determine whether or not somebody has good skills, because remember, it's not binary. It's I have entry-level skill set in an area, or I'm a super expert. Technology can also support us to improve our skills. We can get much better access to development knowledge if we know exactly the skill set that we're looking at. It's not like in order to get better in this job, you do a horizontal move over to this area because you'll learn more. In fact, the only thing you need to learn in that other area may be one particular skill set. So we can be much more targeted in our learning process, both as individuals, but also as organizations. I think your third leg is the one that will see most change as a result of us moving from jobs to skills in terms of how we look at things. And in fact, pretty exciting for people.
Yeah, learning on the job is usually what people do the most. So if you're able to pick up all the skills that you do, that will definitely be beneficial to people.
Having led a team as vast as Gartner's, what management insights can you share that will be valuable to our listeners?
I think training and development should fall on the individual employee. The employer coming from on top high and saying, all of you need to now develop this, that's kind of like a 1920s Taylorism kind of approach that doesn't work anymore. So I think it falls on us as employees to continuously educate ourselves. And this sort of indicates people that for many years have been saying education shouldn't stop at the age of whenever people come out of university or it shouldn't stop there. It's a continuous process. And that continuous process and the responsibility for it should fall on the individual. The organization needs to create the environment for it. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is a little bit of a reaction to what you said, and I'm not actually sure personally where I fall on this, is the world going to be this world of sort of bite-sized jobs that you do and interact and you sort of float around? Because interestingly enough, it goes counter to the trends that has now defined things coming out of the pandemic. The pandemic was very much, we can all work anywhere, right? And now if you see sort of large organizations, they fear for their culture changing. I'm not saying disappearing because I'm saying it's changing. They say disappearing in some instances, but it's just changing. But they fear for their culture if people are not in the office. And in order to be in the office, you need a longer employment relationship with somebody, because you're not going to have people come in and out for 5 hours and then go somewhere else, at least not in the near future. So I think we have this dichotomy of how does culture work and how is culture impacted in a world where we move to skills. And I'm not sure personally, because I haven't really thought through this, is what would happen if we go to the extremes of this. The term culture comes up so often now and has actually over the course of the last 5, maybe 7 years, it's sort of been a term that's been used a lot because all the hard facts were known, but the soft aspects were the unknowns, and culture is definitely one of them.
I don't have the answer, but I mean, on the other side of the scale, you see these totally decentralized organizations popping up in the Web 3.0 world and building Globus. You know, we just decided that we'll be a remote first company, and we built a culture around that. A lot of the employees that I have, I've never even met in person. I meet them all the time on Teams and so on, but we sit in 15 different countries. It's totally remote, but still we managed to build a culture around that. So it's possible. Is that just the old outdated mindset that we're struggling to get rid of? Or is it really necessary for an organization to actually have people physically present together to build a culture?
I think that was why I was also very deliberate in saying that it changes. It doesn't mean that going back to what was is the right thing. Because I agree with you. You can build organizational culture in completely virtual structures, and people thrive. But it requires you to take the key elements, the mindset, the processes, the behaviors, the sort of how we think as an organization, and design those around this. But generally, you can always look at things as being a pendulum, but the pendulum never swings exactly back to the starting point. It always ends up a little further towards the other extreme. And I think that's what's happened in the pandemic. We're just seeing the pendulum try to swing back, but it's not swinging all the way back. And there'll be a reaction that then starts to swing it back towards more virtual structures. At some stage, it settles, because there are things where humans need to be together.
Yeah. I mean, in some industries, you can't even do the job remotely. But I've been surprised sometimes, because in the competition for talent, it's definitely a benefit to be able to look globally for talent compared to just locally in your town or close to the office. And for some of the companies that I advise, I'm surprised sometimes, you know, why don't you look broader outside your own country or city. You'll have such a better opportunity to find the right people. One question I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners hearing this, about the future, about skills, different things are important for recruiters and for the employees. What should they focus on now, and how do you go about evaluating kind of the technical landscape? There's a myriad of different softwares popping up, different solutions. Like, how, as a manager, do you evaluate what to do now and what to wait with? And yeah.
So, the first thing is you never start with the technology. You actually start with the business problem that you're trying to solve. And then you just have to know that there is almost an infinite amount of technology that can solve that. And a business problem can be, I want to develop a new business model for my industry. So I want to really revolutionize things. So I'm not saying you're just doing optimization. You're doing transformation as well. You have business problems and you either optimize them or transform them with technology. That's the starting point. The second thing is how fast you change and how well you change is dependent on the leadership team that you have around you. Unless the leadership team has the right capabilities to change, to act in this world, you're not going to change fast enough. So earlier on, I spoke about being ambidextrous, or the samurai versus the ninja. That is a skill set you want among all of your leaders, because if they don't have it, they can't appreciate this need to change. These are two things that I would want to see, which really therefore focuses on the development of leadership capabilities. And when I say leadership capabilities, it's all managers in an organization. That's the critical aspect. The technology, once you have people that understand it, the technology, is evolves, and you can now take and adapt to that to your business problems.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
What are some strategies you'd recommend to a company looking to incorporate AI into their growth plans?
So the first thing not to do is to create an AI strategy. And there's a lot of writing right now that says, the company should create an AI strategy. That's a silly thing to do, because you have a strategy and you can't have two strategies, because then each of them will compete with each other, right? Because you have a corporate strategy. And so what AI needs to become a horizontal part of the strategy of the organization. And that has to happen today. That is the board's responsibility in private listed companies, and it is the responsibility of politicians and public sector. And they need to do that now, because this is actually a substantive change that's happening. Then I think you focus on leadership, as we talked about. Then the third thing is you define the use cases where you think you will actually be able to have impact, because with all change, you can't get the whole organization to change at the same time. So you're going to have to find the right use cases where you can make change within a sufficiently short period of time. And then fourth, you have to allocate budget to this so that you exactly understand and have the money to fund it, because that's often something people forget. We have a strategy and it incorporates AI. Leaders are on board. We've just chosen the use cases, but we forgot to tell the CFO that we actually needed money for this. And so it becomes this sort of losing battle of, competing against other projects, which often lead to the death of innovation projects because other projects are more well-defined. Those are the four things that I would start with. And I think what will happen, therefore, is you end up with one or two functions in a business, and that could be HR, where you say, okay, well, this is where we have the right leader, we have the budget, we have a clear strategy, so this is where we can actually do this because we have a set of predefined use cases.
I think that's very solid advice. Kind of thinking about my own experience as a data scientist as well, it's very easy to kind of lose sight of the business problem and value, and kind of, because you're a data scientist, you're enthusiastic and you love AI, and you kind of drill down into to the problem. And, I want to build this hugely advanced neural network, and spent months on doing that. But
Yeah.
You forgot about the main business problem, which it might not be big enough.
You need to understand the risk aspect of any substantial change in any technology. And I think this is where HR certainly comes in as a very critical partner. I believe HR owns the responsibility to create the ethics charter for employees in the company. HR has a very critical role in that. If they don't do anything, then I believe all of the debate around ethics will be defined by the legal department. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it's one dimension of what I think is important in this.
Is there any other things, like with all the tech that's changing rapidly, is there any other things that companies should do to prevent themselves from lagging behind?
What you do, it has to be pivotal to the strategy. It's not a separate project that lies with somebody. It's core. If you recognize that and then say, okay, in order to exploit this, I need to develop my leadership. If you do those two things, then you're on the right path.
Clear strategy, develop your leaders. It's kind of the two key things to focus on.
We still need budgets to catch up with this. Companies and organizations' budget is finite, so somebody else is going to have to lose money, that is, in the organization, or be very articulate in terms of saying, if you use this money that I in this year would have used for this, but for technology, then next year I'll be able to actually do things better and faster and cheaper, which is the other scenario. And so I think we're right now in that period where we're starting to learn how much this actually costs, and therefore what we need to do in the 2024 budget cycle, or for the 2024 budget cycle. I know we've seen a lot of writing about this, and there are a lot of large-scale implementations, but I just want to wait and see what happens in 2024. At the end of the day, it's money and availability of skills and people that can actually make the transformation as being the second point.
To wrap things up, Peter, what advice would you give to executives in the recruitment sector striving to compete in what is a rapidly changing market?
Technology and AI is core to your business now. Learn, therefore, from marketing agencies and the whole marketing space, because they've gone through this a number of years ago. And so they know how things changed. But many of the large agencies are still there now. They just look very different from what they looked like 10 or 15 years ago. I think building up capabilities and skills inside the recruiting agencies around technology, understanding that eventually you may offer digital human skills, review your ecosystem, because I think your ecosystem changes substantially compared to the partners that you have been working with in the past. Evaluate your partners on the basis of their maturity and understanding, because you may be stuck with the wrong organizations, the wrong partners, and that may be the biggest inhibitor.
Thank you, Peter, for your wonderful and indeed invaluable insights. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Talent Horizon. We'll be back soon with more insights on the merging paths of recruitment and AI. Until then, stay ahead of the curve and stay competitive.